Inbreeding shaped the course of human evolution. Talk about an inauspicious beginning. Inbreeding is when two closely related individuals, who inherited some identical segments of DNA from the same ancestors, have children. For thousands of years, our ancestors lived in small, isolated populations, leaving them severely inbred, according to a new genetic analysis. The inbreeding may have caused a host of health problems, and it is likely that small populations were a barrier to the development of complex technologies. The Royal House of Habsburg, one of the most powerful dynasties of medieval and Renaissance Europe, reigned over much of Europe for centuries. But genetic inheritance and the perils of inbreeding may explain their demise. But we will talk about that later in this video. In this video, we discuss the most inbred cases throughout history. Viewer discretion is advised. Not everyone who carries a faulty gene will pass away. For the majority, the only way their kids could be in risk is if they end up with someone else who shares the same genetic makeup. They could inherit a recessive illness in addition to recessive copies. These events are rare since our gene pool is rather large and diverse. But if a person is limited to selecting a spouse from their own family, that likelihood may increase quickly as genetic material that is identical or highly similar is passed down through the generations. We refer to this as homozygosity. People may breed with each other for a variety of reasons, including being socially isolated, living in remote areas, or suffering from infrequent but severe maltreatment. Certain communities could prefer to adhere to the tried and tested practices of marrying members of comparable backgrounds, which typically results in their eventual fusion. Due to the family's reluctance to share their immense wealth and influence, royal families have historically been especially prone to inbreed. It can be less desirable to interact with ordinary people if one is socially persuaded that certain individuals are exceptional or even divine. Ultimately, why would a god combine their own blood with that of humans? This indicates that a small number of people have developed strong ties to one another over time. While some are fortunate enough to escape the harshest consequences of their intricate family tree, others provide as heartbreaking illustrations of the reasons inbreeding is frequently viewed as undesirable. It seems improbable that the ancient Egyptian artists intended to portray the departed pharaoh Tutankhamun in the same manner as they had portrayed him during his lifetime, despite the fact that they were not afraid of reality. Beneath the glistening, symmetrical brilliance of his golden death mask, there was probably a very inbred human underneath who suffered as a result. More specifically, what was Tutankhamun doing? The young queen, who died at the age of just 19, was dealing with a multitude of problems, according to a 2010 study that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The study also found that CT scans of the monarch's mummy confirmed these concerns. The most direct causes of his mortality might have been his broken leg and his ongoing malarial illness. He also had a club foot, which prevented him from walking, in addition to these other ailments. In addition, he suffered a cleft palate and scoliosis. A degenerative condition that was eroding the bones in his left foot made this worse. This worsened his health. Due to the fact that so many historical and ancient individuals had this characteristic, it is challenging to conclude with certainty whether or not Tutankhamun's issues were caused by his inbreeding. Still, the evidence did point to the likelihood that he was the product of royal family intermarriage. It is true that one of his sisters was married by Pharaoh Akhenaten, who he thought to be his own father. Tutankhamun was buried with 2 aborted pregnancies in his tomb and did not have an heir, maybe because he was presumably married to his own sister or half-sister. Like the royal families of many other kingdoms throughout history, the ancient Irish royal family was not particularly fond of parting with their wealth to non-citizens. This seems to be the only possible explanation for the genetic composition of the person buried in the spectacular Newgrange tomb, which was built in Neolithic Ireland. The guy in issue was found in a particularly well-appointed area of the stone tomb, which was previously believed to be reserved for the elites of the historical period, according to a research published in the journal Nature in 2020. When examining the genomes of over 40 individuals interred in and around Newgrange, researchers found that this man's genetic code was highly entwined. The interment of these people had happened in and around Newgrange. They found that he had to have been the product of first-degree relatives having an incestuous relationship at birth. He was most likely the child of a father and child, or the offspring of a brother and sister. The researchers concluded that he had connections to the upper classes of that region's civilization more than 5,000 years ago, since he was related to other individuals who were interred nearby. It's hard to refute the DNA proof, despite the fact that there isn't a lot of textual material to back up this claim. Similarly, there is indirect evidence that suggests this behavior was exclusive to upper social classes in Stone Age Ireland. Ultimately, the remains of impoverished farmers were not being interred in a tasteful mausoleum. Therefore, this could be a reflection of similar circumstances that happened in other ancient societies, such the Egyptian pharaohs' courts or the early Hawaiian royals. Families in Short Creek that belong to the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, FLDS, are driven by their desire to stay within their extremely rigid religious structure and to have as many children as possible through polygamous marriages. The purpose of these two objectives is to guarantee the FLDS's survival. However, the FLDS community at Short Creek, which is situated on the Utah-Arizona state boundary, has begun to personally witness the effects of inbreeding that has continued for many generations. Theodore Tarby, a pediatric neurologist, first identified the problem in 1990 while diagnosing a neighborhood youngster. The child at the time had unusual physical traits and significant developmental delays. Tarby found that the boy suffered from Humori deficiency, a rare genetic disorder. This illness has a significant negative impact on brain development and seriously impairs the body's ability to produce energy. Individuals with this illness have physical and mental issues in addition to a seizure tendency. Former FLDS church member Faith Bistline told the BBC that she looked after 5 cousins who had Humori insufficiency. Of them, only one could walk, and all required medical attention, including feeding tubes. Due to the rarity of Humori insufficiency at the time, there were very few documented cases. But finally, medical experts in the FLDS community at Short Creek found an incredible 8 new cases. Their research was released in the Annals of Neurology publication in 2000. It is evident that this was not just a case of a genetic mutation happening by accident. Rather, the small number of people who are able to get married is at fault. The idea that males will have multiple wives reduces this already tiny pool even further by removing the need for additional men and their genes. The terrible poster child for the issue of inbred royals is Charles II of Spain. He was the King of Spain, and it was certainly no fault of his own that he was born into the notoriously inbred Habsburg dynasty, which at the time of his birth, 1661, had become so because of their unwillingness to marry outsiders in order to dilute their wealth and power. In reality, Charles's grandparents served as both his aunt and uncle, and his parents were his niece and uncle. Aside from his obvious physical flaws, such as his conspicuously projecting Habsburg jaw, Charles also suffered from epilepsy, developmental difficulties, and early-onset baldness. Charles struggled with these problems all of his life. His alleged tiny heart, the size of a peppercorn, was discovered during an autopsy conducted on him after he died at the age of 38. Not only that, but he had only one charred testicle and severe internal organ damage. Charles had a bad genetic hand, even though it would seem that some details have been blown out of proportion. Perhaps the most unfortunate incident for Charles and the Habsburg dynasty as a whole was that he was unable to have an heir. He was married twice, but none of them could bear him a kid. The underlying disorders causing all of this are still unknown, although new studies have suggested that genetic kidney abnormalities, problems with enzymes, and a malfunctioning pituitary gland could be the culprits. The highly inbred Habsburg dynasty came to an end when Charles was unable to continue the line of succession in Spain, regardless of what else may have been going on. Almost everyone in early Hawaiian civilization followed a rigid social structure in their daily lives. Konohiki were viewed as being in the middle and Maka'ainana, or commoners, as many of them were. The top position in the social hierarchy was held by a small group of individuals known as the Ali'i, who were further split into ranking groups. The bulk of people were expected to prostrate themselves before the highest-ranking leaders because of the complicated set of social traditions known as kapu, which demanded a tremendous deal of reverence for the ali'i. Before that drastic change in history, breaking a kapu might result in death, even though royals outlawed the practice in the early 1800s. However, the ali'i had extremely limited alternatives when it came to selecting a spouse. The solution, at least in prehistoric Hawaii, was to marry a family member who was inside the first degree of the lineage. The practice used to be respected and seen as a mark of the highest status. These couples' offspring were thought to be exceptionally well off. When Europeans finally arrived on the islands, they discovered that the custom was completely abhorrent. During the 1820s, King Kamehameha III and his sister, Nahianaena, were emotionally challenged. The two reportedly tried to get married and were quite close to one another. But in the end, Nahianaena was persuaded to wed a different guy since she couldn't decide between sticking to her ancient beliefs and accepting the newly introduced Christianity brought by missionaries. She is rumored to have given birth to a boy via her brother, but tragically, the boy passed away soon after. Nahianaena herself died when she was about 20 years old, although she gave the impression of being in good health. Queen Victoria of England's descendants have not fared as well. Victoria is a carrier of the hemophilia gene, which causes the blood to clot insufficiently and puts patients at danger of dying from internal bleeding. Victoria might be able to pass that trait on to her offspring. As the disorder is linked to the X chromosome, inheritors with XY chromosomes are most likely to develop it. This is because the inheritors in question lack an additional X chromosome that might harbor a dominant gene to counteract the recessive. Victoria's own son, Leopold, died at the young age of 30 from hemophilia-related complications. Although Leopold was the earliest known descendant of Victoria to be diagnosed with hemophilia, it is quite probable that he was not the last person to get the disorder. Due to the relatively tiny gene pool of European royals, Victoria Eugenie, Victoria's granddaughter, brought the gene to Spain. The illness claimed the lives of 3 of Victoria's grandsons, but Alexandra, her surviving granddaughter, carried it all the way to Russia, where her lone child, Crown Prince Alexei, was waiting for her. He was then reported to have helped Alexei. This gave the notorious mystic Rasputin a chance to gain favor with the imperial family. Although the heir's genetic abnormality was kept a secret by the royal family, few people were aware of Rasputin's apparent influence over Alexandra and her family. This reportedly made things even more unstable, which led to the assassinations of Rasputin and the Romanov family in 1918, as well as Lenin and his allies taking over the newly communist Russia. Was it just the product of decades of inbreeding enhancing Victoria's hemophilia gene? No, but it also most definitely did not improve the situation. Unfortunately, homes with high levels of physical and emotional abuse are often the source of the worst examples of inbreeding that occur in modern times. For instance, take a look at the Australian Colt family. They have been granted the codename Colt by the court to protect the names of the minors who were abused. This is not their real name. As the police started to learn starting in 2010, that environment proved to be very terrifying. 12 kids and their family were removed from their rural Bua, New South Wales compound in 2012. It was alleged that the adults in the home had seriously neglected the children's education, nutrition, and hygiene. Even more troubling was discovered as a result of the investigation. It was claimed that several children had learning disabilities, and one of them had an odd facial feature. It wasn't long before it was found that some of them had been sexually abused as children, and that some of them had been the victims of abuse perpetrated by members of their own family. According to 2013 court documents obtained by New Zealand police, it all started in the 1960s when a couple known only as Timothy and June moved from New Zealand to Australia. Ludwig I of Bavaria. For many European royal families, the pressure to select a spouse from a reputable family who was also closely related to them was unavoidable. Another European dynasty that ruled all of Germany was the German House of Wittelsbach, whose family tree was especially complicated. Few Wittelsbachs could truly match the blatant flaws of the Habsburgs, such as Charles II of Spain, but they did exhibit some oddities, such as mental illness that was thought to run in the family and affected many of the members. This was one of the more well-known instances. Most people agree that Ludwig II's rule over Bavaria, which spanned from 1864 to 1886, was the most turbulent. He generally had no interest in running the office. Instead, he occupied himself by squandering money on extravagant construction projects. The most famous of Ludwig's constructions is the castle at Neuschwanstein, which sprang from his romanticized appreciation of fairy tales and altered historical accounts. Perched majestically above a mountain ridge is the castle. It was believed that Ludwig's numerous construction projects, including how lovely the never-finished palace was, were a reflection of his fragile grasp on reality. He had undertaken other architectural endeavors, and by the 1880s, he had becoming somewhat of a recluse. It didn't help that on June 10, 1886, he was proclaimed crazy and incapable of ruling. He committed suicide by drowning in a lake near one of his wealthy homes after only 3 days. Meanwhile, others have speculated that the politically problematic Mad King was killed, agreeing with the official suicide verdict. Ferdinand I of Austria was another such person. Some of the inbred royals may have been able to fly under the radar, but others appeared to be so deeply influenced by their genealogy that simply glancing at them revealed that something was wrong. Ferdinand I, the Emperor of Austria, was one such guy. His parents were Holy Roman Emperor Francis II, commonly known as Francis I of Austria, and Maria Theresa, ruler of Naples and Sicily when he was born in 1793. The wedded pair happened to be double first cousins with all of their grandparents in common. Even though genetic testing did not exist in the late 18th century, the fact that the couple's son Ferdinand suffered from hydrocephalus, high levels of fluid around the brain, speech problems, and seizures throughout his childhood could be explained by their strong genetic tie. There are also claims that he had a cognitive disability. According to images of the emperor, the hydrocephalus led him to have an abnormally large head, which was another indication of the disease. It is said that poor Ferdinand had a seizure during the ceremony, marking his marriage to his distant cousin, Maria Anna of Piedmont, Sardinia, in 1831. They were unable to produce children together, but Ferdinand was a decent guy and a popular monarch until political unrest compelled him to abdicate in December 1848. Ferdinand was 82 years old when he died in 1875. Thus, even if his genes were the source of his reported issues, they had little impact on his life. According to a 1980 research published in Central Issues in Anthropology, the blue fugates exhibited similar rates of inbreeding in the Appalachian region as anywhere else in the United States. This finding demonstrates that the notion of inbred Appalachians is mainly incorrect. However, there are few notable exceptions to the norm. The blue fugates may have stood out the most among them all. Martin Fugate, who had been residing in France, moved to Kentucky about the year 1820 and started everything there. He married Elizabeth Smith, and they produced 7 children, 4 of whom had a blue complexion. Methemoglobinemia is a blood condition that causes unusually high levels of methemoglobin, a kind of hemoglobin, in the blood. Both patients' parents carry a recessive gene for the disease in their DNA. Nonetheless, that protein cannot efficiently release oxygen. Cyanosis, which causes skin to turn an unusual shade of blue, is the result, at least in some people. Other symptoms, depending on the disease, may include tiredness, seizures, and developmental delays. Because of the Fugates' decision to settle in a remote place at a time when long-distance travel was difficult, their descendants were limited in the number of individuals they could marry. According to some reports, Martin and Elizabeth's son had a child who eventually married his own aunt. After a while, the family had enough people with blue skin that the clan became known as the Blue Fugates throughout the area. However, when transportation improved, more people were able to marry outside of the group, lowering the incidence of methemoglobinemia in the family. Anyone who still has blue skin can witness it fade away within minutes after taking a tablet of methylene blue. which converts their flawed methemoglobin back into hemoglobin. This is feasible given the modern medical treatment that is available. According to mythology, Cleopatra VII, the Queen of Egypt, was a stunning woman. The evidence reveals that she had a somewhat unremarkable appearance. Nonetheless, this does not appear to have limited her great political clout, as she used her intellect and personality to win over both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. It's probable that she and her family experienced significant inbreeding. The Greek Ptolemaic dynasty, which ruled Egypt from 305 BC to 30 BC and included Cleopatra's forefathers, had a strong interest in keeping the family on the throne. As a result, just 6 people may be called her great-great-grandparents, despite the fact that the average family tree contains 16 great-great-grandparents. During her life, Cleopatra ended up marrying Ptolemy XIII, her brother, and Ptolemy XIV, her other brother. The Ptolemaic era's widespread obesity has been attributed to years of inbreeding, while some researchers speculate that the cause may have been genetic thyroid diseases rather than an excessively opulent lifestyle. However, it is imperative to remember that ancient genealogies are infamously hard to pinpoint. This is particularly true when discussing the Ptolemaic Egyptian royal family, who had a lot of spouses and kids in addition to poorly preserved documents. It is so difficult to get a precise picture of their ancestry. Moreover, Cleopatra herself did not seem to be much affected by her ancestry, as evidenced by the 21 years of power she had before ending her own life at 39. It was also known that she was the mother of 4 children, none of whom were by her relatives. This offers some proof that the gene pool of the era might have been more varied than previously thought. Some of the patriarchs of the Kingston clan, at the very least, feel that power is something that ought to be protected at all costs. In 1935, Charles Eldon Kingston set the foundation for organizations that would eventually become known as the Order, the Latter-day Church of Christ, and the Davis County Cooperative Society. The organization is headquartered in Salt Lake City. Since then, it is reported that Lake City has used a potent and occasionally violent combination of anti-government sentiment, apocalyptic fear-mongering, strict enforcement of the patriarchal hierarchy, and racist rhetoric to drive its members out. Members of the current Kingston community, which has roots in the early Mormon Church, continue to practice polygamy. Oral, Eldon's brother, is alleged to have encouraged incest within the family in order to preserve the family's moral integrity. Consequently, Ortel fathered children with 2 of his nieces and 2 of his half-sisters. His own descendants, most of whom were only teenagers at the time, have carried on the tradition by marrying their nieces, cousins, and half-siblings. Marriages that are forced or committed by children are still strictly unlawful and can result in a criminal sentence, even if Utah state law scarcely acknowledges polygamy between consenting adults as a problem. However, even though representatives for the Kingston group have flatly denied these claims, members of the group have been given criminal penalties for tax fraud in 2023. It has been said that the Kingston family intentionally omits father names from birth certificates to make it more challenging to determine their ancestry. This is true even though the Kingstons continue to adhere to their policy of not talking about personal concerns. The group is cordoned off, which has made it challenging to study the effects of inbreeding. But among other disadvantages, it has been observed that inbreeding has produced children with dwarfism, abnormally small skulls, and vision issues. Ancient Peruvian elites believed that a ruler's heir should come from the son of his major wife, despite the fact that incest was thought to be the best option rather than only the firstborn son. Despite the fact that Incan heirs were thought to be the greatest option, this was the case. Because of political gamesmanship and the desire to hold on to power as long as possible, the transfer of power turned out to be a carefully guarded family affair. It is said that Incan kings began marrying their half-sisters or sisters in an attempt to solidify their position of authority and to cease the bloody intrigue that accompanied the process of advancing one candidate over another. If any of that sounds unlikely, take into account the fact that genetic evidence suggests that ancient humans in the area intermarried often, In 2017, during the American Association of Physical Anthropologists annual meeting, Sarah K. Becker presented on the results of an excavation at a Peruvian burial site that dates from 500 to 1100 AD. According to Forbes, a very unusual spinal anomaly consisting of an extra lumbar vertebra linked to the sacrum was found in the skeletal remains of 14 individuals. In addition to the condition's rarity, the fact that so many people in one place experienced the illness is proof that a significant level of inbreeding occurred. Researchers found that at least some pre-Incan people from the Lima civilization, which peaked between 400 and 1200 AD, engaged in incest during another set of excavations that took place in a cemetery in Lima, the capital city of Peru. Outbreeding had resulted in severe abnormalities of the hips and spine in all 6 women found buried close to a powerful guy. Some of these women were presumably some of the man's spouses. Like in many communities today, incest was considered a significant taboo among ancient Zoroastrians, breaking both cultural and religious laws throughout the ancient world. This opinion is still held, although among the Zoroastrians of ancient Iran, the tradition of getting married to close relatives was sometimes considered a sacred ideal and was finally dubbed Gzwedoda. It is uncertain how often Zoroastrians were actually marrying their parents or siblings during those periods, despite the fact that Persian texts from the 9th and 10th centuries came out extremely forcefully in favor of Gzwedoda. However, these passages appeared particularly strongly to support Gzwedoda. A recurring theme in their writings, the authors of the era surely took their time to paint a positive picture of the ideal united family. Some contended that parents who were connected would love their kids more, get along with each other better, and preserve their bloodlines appearing to be pure, a belief shared by countless other tribes both before and after them. Non-Zoroastrians who wrote about Zeta's life and teachings most likely described the practice as being carried out by the families of Zoroastrian elites, including priests. Nonetheless, it is not implausible that members of lower socioeconomic classes engaged in the activity. A statistical analysis that was published in Community Genetics suggests that these types of marriages have even found their way into local folktales. According to the analysis, the stories have a greater than average percentage of consanguineous marriages than the real world. Even though the majority of Iranians are Muslims, and Islam forbids most forms of consanguineous marriage, some Iranian communities nevertheless view first cousin marriages as acceptable today. House of Braganza. If you want to refute the idea that only the Spanish Habsburgs or the descendants of Victoria, Queen of England, engaged in intermarriage among European royal dynasties, go no further than Portugal's House of Braganza. In an article published in the American Journal of Human Biology in 2018, researchers concluded that 8 of the 17 dynasty members' marriages that are known to exist were comparable to second cousin or even closer in connection marriages. These included the union of an uncle and a niece, as well as a marriage between first cousins. Furthermore, the researchers found that, in comparison to the general population, the average longevity of a Braganza was much lower. One of the most striking examples of the effects of the House of Braganza, due to the extensive inbreeding that occurred, is maybe Maria the Fern of Portugal, the first queen to rule Portugal independently. Because the genetic complexity of the Braganza family have not been studied to the same extent as those of the Habsburg line, we cannot say for sure that her issues were caused by inbreeding. However, Maria, the woman who wed her uncle, did have issues that might have something to do with her complex family history. According to the analysis, the stories have a greater than average percentage of consanguineous marriages than the real world. She gave off the sense that she experienced psychosis in addition to manic episodes, all of which are signs that point to a bipolar disorder diagnosis. However, she had a very tough life because she endured the bloody events of the French Revolution and the ascent to power of Napoleon Bonaparte, in addition to losing both her husband and her eldest son. When Napoleon invaded Portugal in the late fall of 1807, Maria and her family were compelled to leave the nation. They finally made their way to Brazil, where Maria died in 1816. Neanderthals. Despite the fact that the last known Neanderthals went extinct some 40,000 years ago, DNA has taught us a great deal about these closely related human ancestors. One Neanderthal lady lived in the Siberian Altai Mountains, according to a 2013 study that was published in the journal Nature. Genetic material from her 50,000-year-old toe bone was analyzed, and the results showed that her parents were probably half-siblings. Her DNA indicates that there were several additional examples of inbreeding in the family line, and that at this stage, anatomically modern humans, Denisovans, and Neanderthals were already interbreeding, perhaps adding much-needed genetic variation. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and anatomically modern humans are among her predecessors. But why was inbreeding so prevalent among Neanderthals? To the best of our knowledge, they don't seem to have been trying to forge strong dynastic connections between Ice Age Europe and Asia. Based on the available data, Neanderthals were usually found living in relatively small groups that were rather isolated from one another. Actually, that could have been the issue all along. It's probable that Neanderthals' amorous possibilities were restricted to their cousins and other even more distant relatives because there weren't many viable partners in the vicinity. This is a result of the dearth of possible partners in the area. According to a 2019 study that appeared in the journal PLOS ONE, this might have led to a decline in the reproductive fitness of the ensuing generations, which would have reduced the population size of Neanderthal communities. In addition, they might not have possessed the same level of resilience against environmental stressors and would have been more vulnerable to genetic illnesses than the modern humans who eventually colonized their territory and had a more genetically diverse population. Austria's Maria Antonia of Austria, also known as Marie Antoine of Habsburg, the niece of Charles III of Spain, is more deserving of the title of most inbred member of the Spanish Habsburg line. One of the infamously inbred members of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty is Charles II of Spain. According to a study that was published in Heredity, she has the highest known inbreeding coefficient, a measurement of how similar a person is to their own ancestors, in the entire family. In the instance of Maria, it is more than the inbreeding coefficient of an individual born into a parent-child union or to complete siblings. To be more precise, Margaret Theresa's mother was the first cousin of Maria's father, Holy Roman Emperor Leopold III. Maria's mother was Margaret Theresa. Margaret Theresa was a victim of extreme self-inbreeding. Some have even gone so far as to suggest that she died after childbirth due to a weakened immune system resulting from genetics. It's also likely that Maria Antonia's survival as the couple's lone child during her early years was due to this. However, the absence of pediatric and postpartum care in the 17th century was also undoubtedly a drawback. Maria Antonia was amazingly unaffected by her genetic heritage in spite of this. Her own uncle, Charles I, was the intended husband, but the wedding was reportedly called off since she was only 6 years old, and he was only 12. And the family needed heirs more quickly than 2 school-age children could produce them. Not helping matters was the possibility that Charles was already clearly impacted by the inbreeding that took place inside his own family. Rather, Maria Antonia married Bavarian monarch Maximilian II and had a few children before dying in December 1692 from complications during childbirth. When she passed away, she was only 23 years old. That's it for today. Remember to support our channel, please subscribe.